with another episode, man.
Yeah, let's do this. Today we have a pretty interesting set of topics. One being real estate again. I think that's always a important topic that a lot of millennials like talking about. And then the next one being culture wars, specifically talking about identity politics and its impacts. There's a lot of topics we can brush on today, but we'll focus on kind of the ideologies and its impact on certain areas of, say, business or life.
Starting with like the real estate thing. Obviously, this last week I've seen this covered on so many different platforms with the whole the core developer in Canada who has recently come out. They just hired someone to take over a division of single family homes, and that person's responsibility is spending $1 billion into buying about 4,000 ground level suburban homes, fixing up and renting it out.
Yeah. And for those individuals who don't know, could you give us a background on who core development is?
Yeah, so core development is essentially made up of a bunch of. So I'm going through the shareholder list. We have a capital markets person from the Bank of CIBC. So his name is Benjamin Tal. He's a deputy chief economist at CIBC Capital Markets. And then all the other advisory boards are part of either real estate trusts or other banks. So essentially, these are the banks who are responsible for the mortgages, who are also creating these companies who are going to buy up all these homes and then rent it back to you and then profit from both sides.
Right. So yeah, they're essentially a real estate development company who has a lot of ties inside the markets, specifically banks, legal, capital in terms of other investment funds. And they used to be in the condo market, but I guess that's really saturated now. It's become really difficult to make money on it. And now, like to your point, they're investing over $1 billion into single family homes, which have historically been, a huge talking point for many individuals of, millennials specifically wanting to own their first family home. And what core development is doing now, they're coming in and trying to refurbish all these homes and create rentals out of it. So you're essentially taking up supply out of home ownership, like single home ownership, and increasing the rent supply. And I think there is a disconnect there because I feel like millennials are more inclined towards home ownership versus renting. And this is the huge problem. It's not a condo anymore. It's a single family home, and there's such a limited supply of that anyways.
It's disheartening to see. Like, I just feel like everything that we see in the news from politicians and things like that is always supporting this generation, and then all of the actions that we see play out in the market is counterintuitive to that. Right? We're going to see home prices go up. People are just going to go into a rent-based economy.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, it seems like that's what the future of living is, what they want. Yeah. So to speak. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if we can get into so many different, side, I guess, conspiracies or little points and stuff like that. But one thing that people have linked this to is, I think a few years back, the World Economic Forum did a presentation, and during that presentation, they were talking about in one portion of it, they're talking about a world where everyone just rents everything.
Yeah.
So from like your car to your house to your phone to like every little piece is just rented for the span of time that you need it, and it's essentially creating a world where people just rent everything.
Yeah, but the owners are probably those rich individual elites. Again, it's always better to own something than to not own something, have assets, not liabilities. Renting is technically, again, a liability because it's just paying out for the use of something, right? And so, to be fair, core development is not the only company doing this. There's a lot of other investors that are now moving into the single home space because they see an opportunity to make a lot more money in there versus condos, because condos have just been totally trashed in terms of its investment value over the years, just because prices have peaked now, and rent can only go up so high. Whereas with home prices, single detached homes have gone up 30% within the year or something like that, something crazy. So you're looking at a huge potential equity gain on the sale, and or the rental potential is much higher on a single family home than it is a shoebox condo in I guess anywhere in those big cities. But what I wanted to ask you is what are your thoughts on again, they're operating a business and their whole operation is to make profit.
Yeah.
So like what do you feel like in terms of morality, how that fits in?
Yeah, that's a tough question because I feel like you and I know so many people who built wealth by owning a couple homes and renting it out, or owning like a building and renting it out. So I think that generational wealth, it starts with real estate. Like that's the key piece of it. So when you look at someone who's doing something like this, I think it's okay. My personal opinion is it's okay, but not at this scale. Like if you want to cap it to you can only own so many homes, that makes sense.
Right.
But when you're owning $1 billion worth of homes, then you're just setting it up for so many other corporations who have the capital to pull this off, and it's gonna it's gonna move everyone out. So I don't have the opportunity to own 2 homes and rent one out because someone else has $1 billion they can just throw around, right? So I think the concept is okay, but you need to put like checks and balances, like a cap on the number of homes.
I agree. So like this is what I think fundamentally economically can happen. So if we see a trend of these investment companies coming in, and a lot of foreign money also does this as well in these kind of companies, what we'll see is the shrinkage in supply of single family homes available for home ownership. And essentially what that's going to do is drive up prices because there's a limited supply of actual single home ownerships. Even though the supply of rental homes have gone up, it doesn't really kind of fit into the context of where I say the generation is trying to head. And that's single home ownership. And this is just going to put them out of the loop even more. I feel like banks should do a better job. Again, banks are probably the most corrupt organizations out there. But they literally don't care about you. They're just, if they can make money using big money from other corporations, they'll do it. And investors. So like an example would be all these pre-construction homes that are coming out. I would be interested in knowing the percentage of individuals that are actually first-time home buyers versus investors and speculators who are, waiting for a 2-year span and just to sell it,
just to dump it.
And it's a supply issue, right? So they're just gonna continually bump up prices, and that's what these guys are aiming for, right? The huge increase in supply or decrease in supply, increase in prices. And so we'll rent it for 2 years or whatever kind of shit, and then they're gonna sell the properties,
100%.
and invest in like other like areas and probably decimate the crap out of those. And so there's huge kind of issues here, and I feel like banks should do a better job in terms of qualifying individuals and maybe giving preference to individuals who are single family owners. But they're not going to do it just because they know the investors have the capital. They're more secure, and more likely than not, they're probably going to re-up on another mortgage or kind of other investment.
100%.
So it's a hard kind of world to tackle. And that's why we're probably seeing a lot more exodus of individuals going out of these big cities into smaller areas, just because now you can with remote work. But that's still to be seen, and how that's going to impact and how people are going to live in the future.
100%. Just a point on the banks. It never made sense to me how, when we just looked at the shareholders of that company, one of them works for CIBC Capital Markets. It never made sense to me how, if you're in a position in a bank, you can seamlessly move between that bank position to a politician position to a shareholder position. So it's like you are working with the banks who control the housing market with the mortgages and things like that. You're working with the politicians who set the rules for these things, and then you can work as a shareholder in a company that's buying up all the homes and now profiting. You know what I mean? So it's like, I don't understand how you can how we've accepted that as a society.
And I think that's maybe like a topic for a different time.
Whole other issue.
The flow of money and power is a huge conspiracy, I would say too. And there's a lot of corruption that kind of follows that. And again, the interest of all these large companies is to, the shareholders and the people who are running it, or, these other corporations that have specific ties and or interests that relate coincidingly with other companies. So it's a hard world that we live in. I personally feel like this shouldn't be a thing that, can happen, because again, there's such a limited amount of supply. And I think we need to encourage individuals, if they want to buy single family homes for home ownership, rather than having them rent it. Reducing supply is never going to help.
Yeah. So in the States, I think it was Blackstone Group. It was one of the ones.
BlackRock.
BlackRock.
Yeah.
Or one of them who started this trend.
Yeah.
And so I think if we start seeing more of these corporations kind of start showing up in Canada, then we realize that this is a trend. This is where things are headed. And so with that being said, I feel like a lot of what you see on socials and just people in general is like, hey, where's the outrage about housing? Like, why are we not? Why is this not an issue? But there's so many other things going on in politics right now that like it kind of overshadows this giant issue. Which kind of brings us to like that next idea of like, what do we focus on in politics? How do we get meaningful like change and meaningful kind of help from politicians? So what's going on? Like you're on, from your perspective, what do you think we've landed in terms of like how we view politics and all these parties?
So like I think that one of the topics that we wanted to discuss today is just identity politics, and the specific cultural wars that exist, and how media is using that as a way to control different narratives. I recently just listened to a podcast with Joe Rogan, Sagar, and sorry, who's the last one?
Crystal.
Ball, and so that was one of the most informative things I've listened to in a while. And basically, the construct is of how the influence of different ideologies and identity politics have made certain policies come to light, and how corporations use that to their advantage to either lure people in for their own benefit, but not really associating with the whole messaging of it. So the classic example is when we had the Black Lives Matter movement and or these the Pride movement. We use with Pride Month is June. We see all these companies change the logo color and stuff like that. I usually find that quite hysterical because a lot of these companies are not really invested in D&I, which is diversity and inclusion, and or tangibly show it. So a great example of this is Amazon. So
Amazon's a great example of everything.
I'm also using it because Crystal and Sagar talked about this through their whole the podcast they have with Joe Rogan, but they took advantage of the whole narrative around Black Lives Matter, and basically again I think they used it as a way to kind of get a positive messaging around some of the negative narratives that exist with Amazon, specifically how they treat their workers, their long hours, the tracking and all that kind of crap that exists with Amazon. So they use these kind of identity politics as a way to say, hey, we're good people, but in reality it's really just a facade. And the truth is that most of their lower ranked workers are of colored individuals. And so I think Sagar mentioned that they don't promote from within. They usually hire because Bezos has this kind of mindset of like people get lazy after 3 years and they get fired. And so that's I mean, we can go on Amazon and rant quite a bit, but in staying to the topic, I mean, that's an example of where they're just using some type of identity politics to influence decision making and or branding. The same can be said about the Pride Month stuff. So I recently came across a post, and this individual is a part of the gay community, and he noticed it's a multinational company. I forgot which one it was. So in Canada and the US, they updated their logo for the rainbow coloring. But in the Middle East, they didn't. So if you looked up like that company Middle East or whatever the version is or the company name is, it stayed. And again, we understand that the Middle East has a very, very conservative view on some of these things. But if you were a company that actually believed in that and wanted to influence, you would actually go against the grain and probably do that. But again, that's going to impact the money and the monetary things that can do it. So these identity politics really exist within the Western societies. And that's like specific to, say, the business side of things. But there's a lot associated to like the individual side of things and how that has impacted our relationship. So do you want to kind of touch point on like some of the things that are related to actual politics that exist with culture wars?
If you look at some of the politics that's been happening probably over the last decade, you don't see meaningful exchanges of ideas. You know what I mean? And so essentially identity politics focuses on kind of making people focus on things around race, religion, social background, ethnicities, things like that. And if you look at the past maybe 3-4 elections, people tend to vote based on like, and we hear this a lot, the lesser of two evils, right? It's like, who's the least worst candidate? And that's because all these candidates run on like 3 or 4 maybe big topic issues that are very opposing. These issues overshadow the bigger things that are going on in the background, right? So as an example, since we're talking about housing, it's like nobody's talking about housing. Nobody's talking about these corporations like taking over this thing. It's us that are talking about it. But the politicians are just like, whatever. We're doing Pride Month. We're giving you, we're investing in Black communities, which they should do. But that shouldn't take over the conversation over these things, which is going to ruin us.
Yeah, and I think it's important to identify that identity politics is not a bad thing,
right,
when it's done correctly. Specifically, like looking at an example, say, you're an organized group of, say, Black individuals, organized group of women, organized group of, people of the gay community or LGBTQ. And so if those individuals organize in such a way where we have constructive conversations, that works. But where it loses sight is when you organize it in a way where the framework doesn't work. And that's where you have the separation amongst these ideologies. And there's a concept called common entity, I think it is, in sociology, where essentially you have a group of individuals that hold a specific ideology. And when an opposing individual has a different piece of ideology, you automatically associate hate towards that individual. So an example I can give for this is, and Sagar mentioned this too, but we can even give a different example, is so he lives in Washington State. Washington State happens to be really, really liberal. Right? So really left. And so if an individual from the right were to move in, and it doesn't even have to be like, somewhat right or whatever, that individual moving in, one, let's explain Washington as a whole. So if you were, like, say, culturally left, you would feel inclusive into that culture and society, because they have the same thought process. And say you were kind of neutral and you moved into, say, Washington, there is a huge influence of the culture and society around you and the specific ideologies that might influence your decision making further. And so that's, I think, I'm pretty sure the word's called common entity. And though that influences your decision making when you look at a different individual who might have an opposing view, and you automatically associate hate with the individual. And so that's where identity politics has a separation. And they mentioned this thing with Trump specifically back in 2016, when I think it was 2016 when he first got voted in, right? What happened was there was this huge emergence of left kind of ideologies and very kind of extremist views on that side too. And any opposing view was shunned down. Media kind of used that as a way to, exploit different things and stuff like that. And basically what happened was middle America and or conservative America basically were like, even if they didn't affiliate with racism or any of that, they didn't affiliate with a lot of the other ideologies because they were seen as the bad people. Just because they didn't agree with other things. And so the big fuck you to them was, we're voting for Trump. Because this is my way of showing my disdain towards your ideologies now. And I can vote for someone who has given me a platform to talk about these things. So it's interesting to see like how the influence of certain ideologies can impact an individual due to the segregation of their ideologies.
100%. And we see it once the election is done, right? We see like certain regions are all blue, certain regions are all red, and it's like, it's because those regions are concentrated with those type of thinking, those type of jobs who are related to that type of thinking, and so on and so forth. So one thing that I kind of wanted to ask you your thoughts on as we close this out is that, like, what do you think is going to happen to kind of the geopolitics of the country? Typically Toronto tends to be liberal, things like that. Like, now that we're kind of moved to remote working and people have the option to go out to the suburbs and kind of spread out these politics, how do you think this is going to play out? Like, do you think this is better or worse for us?
When you look at the big cities, they tend to be more liberal in nature. And if you see more people in the rural areas, they're more conservative in nature. So if we see a shift in terms of individuals moving to these small towns, there might be a lot of conflict between certain things. Like I can, like it might be an unfortunate circumstance, but like say a gay couple moves into a very rural conservative town, they might be shunned out just because the overarching ideology around that area is conservative and they don't believe in that. Right. So there can be a lot of clashes, but maybe this can also open up the kind of door to more conversations and more acceptance. So there is a positive thing around that. But I feel like it also needs to start within our education systems. And it being not one-sided in terms of influence. And I think this happened a couple years back where there's an individual from Laurier. I think she was a master's student or something. She had an opposing view on one of the topics that were being expressed in the classroom, and she literally, I think, got like shat on by the professor and all that. I think there was a recording, or maybe it was the opposite way around. I forgot. But like, it's those kind of things where a university setting should be a open ground to kind of debate, like a healthy debate, and whether you have one side of the coin or the other side of the coin, you should be able to reflect that. But I feel like a lot of our education system now is set up in a way where you can only think one way, which is, I feel, dangerous, because then you oppose any kind of debate to, say, actual logical thought process in some areas, and that can impact future innovation and decision making. So just having an opposing view doesn't mean you hate the individual or are bad. It's just another constructive thought process that you go through, and I think it's very important to have that open platform to do that and feel safe. So even a lot of professors whose job is to have an open discussion debate, especially in a lot of these, like, say, arts classes, like sociology or maybe psychology and stuff like that, their job is to look at both sides. And now I just recently read an article, watching a YouTube video where the professor is like, I'm going to stay silent on certain things. So you're not getting the full breadth of the education and or topic that you need to learn about, because he's scared about the ramifications or consequences related to him talking about a certain topic. He's going to get fired likely, or he's going to get crucified because he mentioned something the wrong way.
100%.
And so that's the scary part. And I think we need to divulge from that kind of aspect, and let's see it start at the education system. Media has a huge influence. That's why I don't like media at all. It's like they're either one way or the other, not independent. And so we'll see where everything goes, but hopefully better rather than worse.
Everything that you said there, I definitely agree with. I think that's kind of why we started this conversation around identity politics, because we recognize that this is in play, and we're going to be faced with more of this now that these communities are mixing in the urban areas and things like that. I hope that it just provides an opportunity for people with different types of thinking to understand that, like, just because I don't agree with what you do doesn't mean that, I'm the enemy. Like, we're actually in this together. The enemy is not who you think it is, right? And you would actually collectively get more done and more benefits for everyone if we stop infighting between each other and actually just say, you know what, let's figure out a way to get you what you want. Let's figure out a way to get me what I want, right? And that's essentially what I would argue is what the political class does not want. They don't want
the wealthy elite is really constructing a way to use these identity politics for their own advantages. And I think that's, again, a dangerous thing. But a lot of people don't realize these things. And they're just consumed by the media. They're like, okay, let's just do whatever. And or consumed by that whole common entity aspect. Like, this is the cultural norm here. This is what we're going to do. There's no opposing things that exist. And so those influences need to get, I feel like, drop a little bit. Or more common knowledge is needed for individuals to be more informed about these things. So that's why I love these, like, other YouTube channels that are independent and look at both sides, because there's a fair debate and aspect to those, and you learn about both sides. Because that's going to provide for more of an innovation and more kind of growth within our society versus these just like bickering wars that you guys have.
When you see neighbors who are maybe conservative or liberal and they fight between the ideology of that person, right? So I have a friend who will complain all the time about people who vote liberals because he's like, Justin Trudeau is an asshole.
Yeah.
And that's his opinion.
Yeah.
So he's like, so I vote conservative. And I'm like, but we're both in the same neighborhood.
Yeah.
And like, voting for either of them has not helped either of us get out of this neighborhood. So it's like, do you see the problem? It's like, we're fighting about the wrong reasons. So hopefully this kind of starts that trend and kind of brings more of us together, and we can fight off some of these shady things that are coming into the market, like these corporations that are going to buy up all the houses.
Yeah.
But that's kind of my 2 cents on that. I think we just got to keep fighting. The politicians are not on our side.
No,
and
sure not.
We're expected to do more just to get that a little bit more, and that's never going to stop.